Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Really Jewish, our conversation about what it is to be Jewish. If you're back for another listen, welcome back. And if you're here for the first time, Bruchim Habaim. Yair and I are delighted to have you. We're returning to our regular schedule, whatever that means. Yair is still in and out of bomb shelters while in Israel, and I'm based in the UK. For the next 2 weeks, we're taking a closer look at Yair and Oliver, at me and my dear friend Yair. This week we are starting with me. The intention is to just go a little bit deeper and to offer up to listeners a little bit of the journey of how we got here. This Really Jewish project is one where we think about big topics that shape the Jewish world, and is also a personal examination of who we are and how we're personally affected by our own Jewish lives and journeys in general. I'm excited to share a bit of my story and explore a little bit of what it is to be really Jewish and how I live some of the highs and lows of who I am and who I've become. This week, join Yair Eldan and Oliver Joseph for Really Jewish. Yair is a law professor in Israel. I am Oliver, a rabbi in the UK. I am religious and Yair is secular. We're inviting you to a conversation that we've had for the last 15 years about being really Jewish. So, Yair, how are you?
Good. I'm so excited towards this episode, really, to hear your story, because it's this week it's all about you, Oliver.
But
And
next week,
I'm really curious to hear, a little bit of how you got here. What is it that makes you, what you are, Jewish, and how did Judaism shaped who you are?
yeah. So, it's great to be here. I am a little bit scared about this episode, Yair, because it's exposing and it's a beginning place for kind of what we want to do on Really Jewish. But I'll tell you a little bit of my story, a snapshot. And as with last week's, we're going to get into a little bit of learning later on inside our Jewish tradition, a text that I've bought. But as a kid, I was born in North London, and we were raised in a pretty nice Jewish family. Interestingly, my parents kind of both came from pretty secular backgrounds growing up. Mum in Manchester, Liverpool, dad in North London. Their religious identity was kind of shaped, not unlike I think lots of people, shaped by way of having children. So they had twins together when when they first got married. That's me and my sister, and then another little baby, Betsy, a couple of years later. And they were brought to the chuppah, brought to the Jewish marriage canopy by way of their cousin. By way of Deanne and Derek, who definitely deserve a shout out, who facilitated the possibility they should have a Jewish wedding ceremony with a rabbi, which maybe wasn't, as we say in Hebrew, muvan me'elav, wasn't an obvious direction for them, but it certainly was something that they willingly accepted, and that was the beginning of their Jewish lives together. I think the key part in terms of the Jewish part, what's really Jewish about my upbringing, was Mum's interest in Jewish life, in a journey which was involved in synagogue, involved in ritual, initially through the nursery that we went to as children, which was a Jewish nursery, a Jewish gun, and then more and more involved in Jewish life. I think Friday night dinners were very core and key parts of our lives, like a kind of very full table with lots of guests. And I think also just a real strong sense, perhaps, which was inherent and nothing to do with Jewish tradition, perhaps just more to do with family and in particular mum, that Hachnasat Orchim was like a really core part of our family life, just welcoming everybody. As teenagers, the house was just pretty full and bustling. And I think, reflecting back on those times, a lot of that was in particular both a sense of welcome in our home, but also a real sense of mum caring for people, which is cool. Like cool to grow up with that kind of model, which I think many of my siblings have carried forward.
No, I'm just the moms. There's this verse, "Shma beni musar avicha ve'al titosh torat imecha." The mom as a transferring of tradition in the Jewish families. But also, for me, I also felt the love of mom and her caring and making of the home as a basic feature of my childhood. But intertwined with it was my feeling that there is like a bear hug here that I need to actually be released from, or release myself from it. I was wondering whether you felt it as well, or it's all about, there was only something positive about it.
Manyan. It's a very interesting question. We have to jump to the end of the story, which is that mum passed away at a pretty young age. So I think by the time, so the end part of the childhood phase is interesting, because in my life, not unlike perhaps lots of children in this generation, but childhood was cut short. So at the age of 17, I had cancer. That was the tail end of my childhood. I think maybe like a lot of boys, like not so mature at that age. And then suddenly, wake up, my life was threatened by my cancer. It was at a point a dangerous cancer. Thank God, a very curable cancer. Even in those days, 20 years ago, this is the year 2000. And then soon after my treatment ended, mum also got cancer. BRCA-related, a kind of genetic-related cancer that runs down the maternal line. Mum's mum, and later my sister Betsy. So it's a really cool and key part of my own journey, is that I never felt that stranglehold, at least not personally. I can't speak for my other siblings, of mother's care, or kind of mum looking down, because her passing was before my 19th birthday, I think. And the opposite in many ways is that the last 20 years, she's now been not physically here in more parts of my life than she was. I actually lived with her 20 years more than 20 years since she passed away. I know that a part of my life experience has been framed by that lack of reassurance, by that lack of kind of continuity of relationship that mother, the image or the figure of mother, can provide.
So interesting to hear, and obviously it's something that I think I cannot understand. And my wife's parents passed away in the last 5 years. Her mother 4 years ago, and her father 5 months ago. I miss them, but she always says to me, "You can't understand the void that I feel." And one of the things that comes up to me now, I'm sorry, it's just it's when you speak emotionally, it's something about it is very associative. I think about the fact that how much the conversation between us, which is a lot of times very emotional, and we're both men, and you grew up in England, which is a very, I don't know, I mean, English people don't tend to speak a lot about their emotions. And Israelis, of course, there's something about masculinity and patriarchy that is very, we're consumed with it. But with us, I think part of us being open about emotions is connected to the fact that the Jewish identity is very strong with us. I mean, there is something about it, I think, the fact that we are learning a lot of Gemara, of Talmud and Mishnah. There is something about these texts that is, just brings up a lot of emotions. And obviously you can ignore it and just refer to them as legal texts, but I think something about it is very, opens you to an emotional conversation.
So, and I want to get into that. I think that's absolutely right. Listen, how did I get here? I think after Mum passed away, I think 2002, 2001, terrible with dates. I wanted to do work in the world that was meaningful, and that really it didn't happen straight away. But that was my journey to be a rabbi. 2006, I think. By 2006, 2008 maybe, I was already studying in Israel, not very far away from you in Jerusalem, and on that path. So there's something about associatively that there's something about Jewish study, which exactly what you describe, that permits and welcomes that broad perspective on life, and that aspect of examination and searching, which is so present both inside the text, and I think to a degree we're permitted inside our Jewish community. So I definitely relate to that, the possibility of traveling with the tradition as a support and as a caring fellow.
That's what I wanted to ask you. Was there something therapeutic about it? I mean, for you, to actually endure, and accept your life through religion?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think it's fair to say here, when I went to yeshiva, I was in study, but I didn't become that frum that quickly. I think it's been from in Jewish language is religious. I think it's been a long journey of now more than almost 20 years, and I am definitely probably more religious each and every year, which is a bit wild and a bit bonkers, but feels like a very natural and slow journey. I started keeping Shabbat, but I wasn't that crazy from at the beginning, that crazy religious at the beginning. But in a subconscious way, I just needed a life of journey. And I worked in politics for a little bit immediately after Mum died. I got my degree, not in that order. I went and studied politics at university. I was a mess. When I look back at those 4 years of university immediately after Mum died, I was not in a good space. I didn't really tell anybody where I'd come from, the fact that Mum had just died. I had friends and some lovely friends, but it was a messy journey. And I think coming out the other side of that, I traveled to Canada for a year, which was really healing because I kind of got to start again and meet new people and be a new person. All of these moments are important, but the ta'alich, the journey of arriving in Jerusalem and starting study in the warm embrace of many friends and rabbis. Rabbi Joel gets a shout out, one of my close colleagues, who really cared for me. And that journey hasn't stopped up until today. And the journey is still one of healing and coping and surviving.
But when you reflect about on the process you are or your life, you say you become more frum, meaning i.e. you actually commit yourself to more mitzvahs, right? Or to more rituals, or to the details of mitzvah. That's what you mean, right? What does that, how do you think that affects you, or why do you think you become more frum? That's my question. How does religion actually, what's her role in your life?
So I think October 7th has been very impactful on this house, on my family life. Let me back up 1 second and just tell the last part of the story,
Sure.
so that we have chronology. Ein mukdam u'muchar b'Torah. There's no early or late in the image of the rabbis in the Torah story, but I like to keep a little bit of chronology here. The last part of the story, in terms of formative moments, is that my little sister also got cancer, a connected genetic cancer that she also got in her late 20s. And, fought a good fight against that cancer, but ultimately also passed away. And that was a very difficult journey because it was also coincided with my last 2 years of rabbinic studies in Los Angeles. I left Jerusalem after 5 years and went to Los Angeles to finish my studies. It was a crushing time for me because it was, I guess when you finish 7 years of study, could be a celebratory time, and it really coincided with her getting very, very sick and ultimately passing away in August 2015. I graduated from my rabbinic studies and got smicha just a couple of months early. But that journey was also, incredibly difficult. I could make the argument that when Betsy passed away, I was at least better equipped for the journey than maybe as like a 19-year-old man, those years, 15 years earlier. But it was tough, and also emerged pretty messed up. In the years after Betsy passed away, I became a rabbi. I started working as a rabbi. I also became, a husband and a dad, and that's also been a really fascinating journey, of which we could probably spend, we probably will spend a whole episode talking about raising children and being good partners. Those are both two good topics to get to.
By the way, we were in touch already when Betsy passed away, and I remember those years. I remember your emails. I remember that it affected you immensely, and I was worried about you. I remember my worries, and it was a very difficult time. Yeah.
So the question you asked, just then to return to the question you asked, was about why more from. I think, listen, part of it's quite straightforward in terms of raising kids. I think when you raise kids, thank God we have 3 young children now, I have thought about tradition and religious life in different ways because I want my kids to see and live a certain part of the tradition and to see it in front of their eyes. If we're talking about saying the Shema, I want them to see people in prayer. If we're talking about tefillah at synagogue or the reading of the Torah, I want them to see those things. If we're talking about festivals, I want them to experience that. That's a new experience for me as a relatively new dad, 6 years into parenting. But I also think that it relates to the text that I'm about to teach. The text that I'm about to teach is from Derech HaMelech, from the Esh Kodesh, a teacher that I often teach from, the Pezetzner Rebbe from pre-war Poland, just outside Warsaw, ultimately becomes known as the Warsaw Ghetto Rebbe. And in the 20s, he's writing a book, or his sermons are being recorded, which ultimately get turned into a book called Derech HaMelech. If you're watching on YouTube, I'm holding the book up. But he refers to, maybe I'll get into the text and then answer your question, he refers to standing at the center of the Garden of Eden. Standing at the very center and sampling the flavors and the tastes and the fruits of the Garden of Eden. And he describes that many of us spend our whole lives on the outside of the garden looking in. My image is always of like a picket fence, of like kind of lifting your chin up and peering over into the beautiful garden, but never stepping into the garden. And for me, that's a part of Jewish life. I think I feel spiritually elevated inside many of the mitzvot that I try and push myself towards. And I take pride in living that journey. And I find the kind of structure of Marechet HaMitzvot, like the structure and the integrity of this protective shell or protective structure of the mitzvot to be healing and holding. And I can't escape from the fact that in a very personal way, respective specifically to my cancer and mum's cancer and Betsy's cancer specifically, and then raising family on the back of that, like still in strength and love and care for my partner and for my kids, that structure has been incredibly nurturing, incredibly supportive. For me personally, I can only talk about my own personal journey.
Wow, thanks. Thank you. Listen, as a secular, I don't know if it's surprising or not, but I find myself a lot of times, using psalms in order to just, react to the very harsh reality I'm living in, and, both personally and nationally. And I'm just using the approach to God, to tell him about, I don't believe in God, but I still approach him and I say, Lama Hashem ta'amod merachok ta'alim leitot batzara, as the poet of Psalms says. Why do you stand afar, God? And I do say it, and there is something therapeutic about it. But I think, going back to my question about mitzvahs and about being more frum, I feel as a secular Jew that, I spent a lot of time studying Jewish texts. I feel that there was a transition from, the Bible, which was, I think, very, very simple, but there is something genius about it. The fact that people in the Bible, when they have a problem, they just, they pray. And, we spoke before this session about prayer, and, there is something about prayer that is very basic. And even me as a secular, I feel it very strongly. But when the rabbis came and they did this, the transition to a whole legal system with rules and sub-rules and all these details, I think something in this specific thing, the dealing with suffering, with depression, with mental illnesses, that we all, not illnesses, but mental collapses that we have, each one of us in our lives. The dealing, I think, is not as good as the Bible, because, the rabbis, what they did is that they said to you, listen, we understand that you have a problem, and they validate it as, if they say, with chametz, you need to check the chametz in your cellar, but only 2 rows. Why? Because if you will start to think what would happen if a rat took the chametz from here to there, en la davar sof. For me, as a secular, it's beautiful, because they say, we validate your OCD, but we say to you, listen, you don't have to take it too far, which is nice. But when you think about it, this validation, and there's more areas in the religion that does it. This validation, what it does, it disconnects you from your suffering, from your raw suffering, because everything is, becomes a mitzvah. Everything becomes a ritual, and then it disconnects you from your suffering, and this disconnection is very bad for a person, because you have, in order to heal yourself, you need to be in connection with the suffering. I'm just, as a secular, saying something about mitzvahs in this. I had a point of saying that, but I understand that for religious people, this frumness, this going into the details, there is something therapeutic about it.
I think for me that's exactly the point. It's good. So from connecting with Pesach already, we haven't even got to our Chodesh, the month before, and you're already giving drush about Pesach. Listen, I challenge on each of the levels your secularness or your lack of belief in God. Ein ledavar sof is exactly a description also of God. When I, or it sounds like even you, turn to Psalms, in many ways, that's exactly what I'm turning to, the Ein Sof, that God is without limitation, without description. And for me, that's the mitzvah. I don't see it as switching off. Literally in recent months, I've been like reapplying myself in ways of prayer. It's like I'm not a good person in tefillah. I really struggle with it. I love going to shul on Shabbat. Most of the time now, because we're with kids, I'm not really in shul on Shabbat because kids are like climbing the walls and trying to trash stuff and doing crazy things. But I do love being in Shul on Shabbat and certainly hearing the Torah reading. But the tefillah is hard for me. But when I stand and say the Amidah in the morning, now in like trying to reacquire some of the parts of my own prayer life, that's meaningful. That's not for me denying my own process and hiding from, in your description, like my own pain. For me, that is suspending myself in the Ein Sof, suspending myself in a knowledge of how little I understand about the world, and a knowledge of ultimately the ultimate questions of who I am and where I will go after I live this short life don't belong to me. The answers don't belong to me. For me, that's God. Do I believe in God in the way that you're describing? I don't know. I don't know whether I believe in God, but I do believe in the power of suspending our own knowing and lending some of that to God. Us being the knowing people and the aspect of God being like the not knowing the essence of the world.
I want to hear more about the text of the Ish Kodesh. So
Okay.
Let's go back to this. I just want to comment and say, think about vows in the Bible. You know, people who vow, you can't, cancel the vow. You're committed, because everything you say is you have to actually do. And the rabbis, with their wisdom, they created, a system of a devaluation of vows. You can cancel the vow if you go to a rabbi, you explain why you did the vow, and he can actually, with another two rabbis, he can do hatarat nedarim, right? He can cancel the vow. But what I'm saying is that when a person commits to something and he vows, obviously he's in a very bad mental, in a mental state that is either depressed, or he wants to take control over his life, or he's very happy, which is also a very extreme mental situation. But in the rabbis, what they did is actually take a lot of powers to themselves, because everyone is actually dependent on them, and everyone actually is supposed to tell them their deepest and craziest inner self. So here's another example where there's a disconnection to the suffering itself. I think they meant good. They meant well. They obviously want a lot of more power. But I think, I mean, as a secular Jew, I feel that the whole connection to suffering through mitzvahs is a bit distorted. That's my feeling, but I hear you and what you said.
So the bit that I relate to in the text, which really seems to be here shaping our different approach, is the aspect of kinyan. So the text says, "Notnim et atzmeinu leTorah," that we give of ourselves to Torah, and the image is a bit like a marriage ceremony. That the Torah, the edifice of the Bible and maybe mitzvot gives themselves to us, and we give of ourselves to the Torah. And the reason why I kind of like the text is because it's that description of all in. As a rabbi in community, I don't often tell people to be all in because people would laugh in my face. But there's an aspect of ritual and religious life that demands a kind of stepping into that like structure of life. And it's hard to be in that. It's hard to understand all of the different aspects of that world unless you're in that world. That's the image of stepping into the garden. When I think of, Betsy's life of blessed memory, she lived on a yoga retreat the last couple of years of her life in New Zealand. And that was a similar thing. Like if you want to understand yoga in a full way, not just yoga where you go and sit on a mat for an hour on a Thursday morning, but yoga as like a practice, you have to get inside it. You have to use the philosophy of yoga in the way that you chop wood or sweep leaves or eat, all of the different parts. And Judaism has that in spades. Like Judaism has that almost to an extreme. But, when I study the Esh Kodesh or when I get involved in a Talmudic text, so many different parts of the text are, the touch points are Jewish practice. So it's interesting. Maybe I'll ask that question back to you, Yair, because when you're studying these texts as a lawyer and as a hacham, as somebody who understands like Jewish law and secular law, like what does it mean when you study a text? Michutza, you're in this context, you are looking. It says in the text like sfarim chitzoniyim, like you're looking on the text as like from above or from a side, looking at the project of Jewish life in this context from an academic vantage point. So how does that work into your kind of own identity and how you live your life then? Because I'm interested, because for me, I'm getting more inside and you're saying, I'm okay from out here.
So interesting. Obviously, I love in this text of the Eish Kodesh, I love the fact that there's a relationship, there's a reciprocity between God and Israel. For me, that's basic. Heschel's God in search of man. Yeah, that's better for me than one-side relationship with someone that just gives you orders from above. Obviously, and I also love in the way you actually described Betsy in the yoga retreat. Really, it's so. That's the point, to give yourself to something, or to someone, which is such a challenge for us as modern people, just to give yourself totality in a way. But at the same time, I feel a little bit distant from the fact that I felt suffocating when I read the text. I felt that there is no space for me, for Yair. He describes a relationship that encompasses everything, and in a way, I feel that the problems between seculars and religious people in Israel these days connects to this point, because I feel that religious people became with no space. That religion actually encompasses everything, and you can't, in a way, you can't have a conversation because there's no space for a person inside of this religion. Religion can be a part of your life, I feel. That's what I feel. I understand the fact that you want to give yourself in total, but when it comes to religion, I think there is something very wrong about humanity or humanism in terms of that. And I just want to say, with regard to your question, when I read these texts, when I learn them, first of all, obviously, there's something about identity. There's an echo from the past, that I need as a human being. But there's also something reflective about me. I feel that these texts are, not all of them, but a lot of them are, written by very smart, very interesting people who were very interested in the things that I'm interested in, and I have a lot to learn from them. And as a study is actually for me a way of, as you said in the beginning of the session, is a way for me to understand myself better.
So I'm going to try and draw us to a close just on this conversation, and we've got some shout outs just before we close. Just tell me like another sentence or two here on where you're left from these texts. I think we smashed it. I think this has been a very interesting conversation. I shouldn't say that too often on the podcast, but I really think we framed like two sides of the story of where we both come from in this context. But where are you left, Yair?
Listen, there is something about I didn't say that, but it's also true, because there is something a bit I don't want to be indulged in my own self, but to be, it's fun to study Torah for me. I mean, I enjoyed study Talmud when I was young, so there is something that is just joyful about studying Torah. It's connected also to the reflection, it's connected to the intellectual stuff, but there is also a joy. And that's why, I mean, I always understood deeply the fact that when you mourn in Avlut, you're not supposed to study Torah. I always understood it, thoroughly, deeply. Yeah.
So I think that's a really helpful segue for me. I think what I take away from this is that I have used, maybe selfishly, my own rabbinic journey as a way to externalize some of that process. I think I live a very full and joyful life today. And I think by using segments of teaching and segments of learning to externalize some of the more difficult parts of my own life, that's helped me to grow from them. And I think we've done a little bit of that as a modeling today, like looking at the page, talking about our own story and our own journey. And, we talk about the nitzutzot, that those sparks that are found somehow are lifted up. And there's healing that comes of that. So thank you. I'm going to move us forward. A new segment that we want to bring just in the last couple of minutes here is feedbackim. Feedbackim in Hebrew is feedback. I just want to share a little bit of what people have been saying about the podcast from the street. We're very grateful for our listeners, and even more grateful when listeners are in contact just to say what their experience of the podcast is. We get to improve the podcast and also just generally have a more interactive space and responsive space in relation to what we're teaching, what we're talking about on Really Jewish. So Ava from Leeds said, what bad luck to have war break out just after you launched your first episode. I'm glad you didn't become instant experts on Iran, which is all too common now. She also actually offered a critique of perhaps getting to the point a little bit faster in the podcast, which we try and achieve today, which was a very helpful feedback just to, get stuck into the material that we actually want to look at. Eddie Kaplan, who's one of my dad's friends, who's in London, said he really enjoyed it and said that he thinks we could be a thing, which is exciting. And then Leah from Radlet said she had nachas and she's looking forward to the next podcasts coming along. And she said that it was very important that we were holding these conversations in a public way. So Really Jewish is getting better by way of your feedback. So send us more and send us questions and also topics that you want us to look at. Before our closing script, Yair, a final word from you?
I feel that we are getting deeper in a way and understanding the medium, but also the relationship between us and with regard to religion, and I'm grateful for that. Thank you, Oliver.
Sounds really Jewish. Thanks for listening to Really Jewish, and thanks for your support. If you've got to the end of our episode, share a video on Instagram or TikTok or Facebook, share this podcast with other people, and offer us a review where you listen to your podcast. We're building this from the wheels up, literally. And if you want to be on our team or help us with our social media or any other aspect of recording, we'd love to hear from you. And finally, if you'd like to click onto our Patreon and offer us some financial donation towards the making of the podcast, every euro or dollar or shekel will help us. And join us next week for more Really Jewish with Yair Eldan and Oliver Joseph. Thanks a lot.